I used to try so hard to understand a poem. I was being vigilant instead of receptive. If the poem is saying the unsayable, I don't need to articulate it back to myself with words. The poet has done that for me. Lily Taylor. Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny, and as you could probably tell by the intro to this video, I'm going to be talking today about poetry. To start off, I'm going to say that I am definitely not an expert in poetry. I am a poetry appreciator and a poetry lover, and so this video is coming from a place of love and wanting to share the experience that I am lucky enough to have from reading poetry with everyone else. And the motivation for it comes from a few different places, but one of the main ones is kind of a general sensation that I've noticed on BookTube, where a lot of people will talk about why poetry isn't working for them, or why they're not qualified to rate the poetry, and I just wanted to talk about that today. I also wanted to mention that there are several booktubers out there who have made videos about poetry and are continuing to make videos about them that I think can further what I'm going to say here today, and in a lot of ways probably better articulate what I'm saying here today, and may articulate it in a way that makes more sense to you. So I just wanted to point those out. So Jen Campbell's channel, she does Dissect a Poem. She is a poet herself, and so she can show you how to analyze poetry, how to see poetry from a really literary standpoint, but also from a poet herself, in which she is coming from an analytics perspective, analyzing and interpreting poetry in a wonderful way. Matthew Sharapa did a wonderful video called You Understand Poetry that said a lot of the things that I will probably say today in a much more articulate way, so I'd like to recommend you watch that. I was just amazed by his ability to convey a lot of the ideas that I was noticing and feeling in reaction to a lot of people's poetry videos on BookTube. Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading and Brian from Bookish have a series they're calling Poetry for Beginners, and it's a really great monthly check-in where they talk about a different poet and they interpret a poem from that poet, and it's really about them learning and finding out about poetry for themselves and talking about it in a really down-to-earth way, and I would recommend that. And there's also Strip Cover Lit's poetry newbie tag, so that covers a lot of different poetry, and Steve Donahue also does a Poetry Tuesday on his channel, and he analyzes a poem, talks about poetry once a week. So there's lots of different options out there for you to find a way to learn more about poetry, to talk about poetry, and just in general increase your knowledge if you're interested in doing that. Not that I talk to anyone about poetry ever. My relationship to it is sidelong and almost entirely private. I can't write it. I read it irregularly. In the practice of teaching it, I could only locate myself as a student, with no authority, no important opinions, no sense that I was ever correct. Gia Tolentino. All the quotes that you're hearing today interspersed in this video are from a book called Who Reads Poetry, which is a collection of essays that were published in Poetry Magazine, which is, I believe, based out of Chicago in the United States. I found the essays in this book to be really interesting. They held a lot of different perspectives on poetry, from people as diverse as writers to rappers to actresses to scientists, just different types of people from different walks of life who all felt that poetry was an important part of their reading experience and an important part of their lives. And I really enjoyed learning about the different ways that poetry is integrated into different people's perspectives. And so along with that, I just want to encourage you to not ever use the term, I don't understand poetry. because I think you're selling yourself short. As many people have said in many more articulate ways than this, you are the interpreter of these poems. You look at them, you read them, you can like them or not like them. They can make you angry, they can make you disappointed, they can make you frustrated, but you do understand them. I don't hear a lot of people talk about novels and write off a whole genre because they don't understand them, and that's what a lot of people say about poetry. I just don't understand poetry. Well, you may not have understood the poetry that you've read so far. You may not understand a certain poet's way of writing poetry, but you certainly do understand poetry. There's not some mystical formula that you have to decode. It's more about finding the poetry that works for you and letting the emotional aspect of the experience wash over you. I am dismayed when I hear questions about the utility of poetry. How do you use poetry, and what is it good for? This is odd. Poetry is song. No one asks, what use is song? What use are birds? Poetry has no use. It matters because of its inutility. Leopold Froelich. The other comparison I like to make to poetry is music. So just as it says in the quote, you don't wonder why birds exist and why they sing. You don't question the validity of music. Why do we question the validity of poetry? So music, songs, are essentially poems set to a melody. And I think there's something about the music that helps us to accept the words and gives us a sense of what the words are supposed to be meaning. So if you have an upbeat tune, you know that you're supposed to be getting excited and getting energized from the music. If you have something that's slower paced and using minor chords, then you may be supposed to be getting sad from these words. And often I hear songs and I have no idea what the artist intended when they wrote the lyrics, but the music itself gives me an indication. And so I think people are way more comfortable in thinking about songs and music interpretation than they are about poetry. And I would say to you, you can do the same thing with poetry. Often you can read the lyrics of a song and not have the music to them, and they are exactly like a poem. I'll give you an example right now. Sweet Bird by Joni Mitchell. Out on some borderline, some mark of in-between, I lay down golden in time and woke up vanishing. Sweet bird you are, briefer than a falling star, all these vain promises on beauty jars, somewhere with your wings on time you must be laughing. Behind our eyes, calendars of our lives, circled with compromise. Sweet bird of time and change, you must be laughing, up on your feathers, laughing. That's not the whole song, but I think you can see from just those few words that I know the tune of the song, and the tune of the song was going through my head as I was reading those words, but it's essentially a poem, right? And they are so interconnected. And so if you feel like you can love and understand music, then I think, and lyrics and songs and pop songs, then you have just as much chance of understanding a poem. It's really just the words without the music. I thought I would give you my personal perspective on how I look at poetry and just offer it up as an example of a way to let it be part of your life without putting a lot of pressure on yourself to feel like you have some sort of English literature degree where you can qualify what you're reading. I compare poetry to looking at visual art in an art gallery or art museum. I see them as very similar experiences. The difference being with poetry, I'm looking at an art form with words rather than paint or sculpture or fiber. When you are in galleries, I often hear people who don't understand modern art say that, I don't understand why this artist did something like this. And I find there's a correlation between poetry and modern art where people will say, well, I'm not smart enough to understand what this means, and therefore I'm going to write it off as not for me. And I think you're doing yourself a disservice and also a disservice to the fact that these artists, these poets and artists want you to get something out of their work, whatever that may be. If you are looking at a painting and it gives you a feeling of indifference, then that is your feeling. That is what you got from that piece of art. You could educate yourself further about what the artist intended when they were making that work. That may change your perspective of the work, and it may not, but it's still your perspective, and you are entitled to that, and you are allowed to shout it from the rooftops or keep it quietly to yourself. And you should look at poetry exactly the same way. When I read a poem, I'm looking at not only what words are there, but how the words are placed on the page, the rhythm of the words, the cadence of the words, and the visuals are very important to me. So I also enjoy poets who use words in a certain way to create a certain picture in your mind. That is, to me, such a beautiful experience. It's not as intellectual and story-based as a novel experience is when you're reading it. So it gives you a bit of a different format in which to enjoy words and in which to experience something. It takes you out of your everyday. It moves you into a different place. It lets you rest and be in a more meditative, even a prayerful sense with words, as opposed to following a plot and being involved in a character's life. So I really think there's a lot of value in that, and I would encourage everyone to think about modern art, to think about abstract art in that similar way. When you're going to look at a piece, you can hate it, and that's perfectly normal. But it doesn't mean that you don't understand art as an entire genre, and it's the same thing with a poet or a book of poetry or a collection of poems. You can read those poems and you can like one of them, you can hate 3 of them, and you can think that the rest of them were just okay. And that doesn't mean you didn't understand them. You did understand them, and you interpreted them as you saw fit. To experience poetry is to see over and above reality. It is to discover that which is beyond the physical, to experience another life and another level of feeling. It is to wonder about the world, to understand the nature of people, and most importantly, to be shared with another, old or young, known or unknown. Ai Weiwei. I consider poetry to be a opening door for me. It allows my brain to rest. It allows my brain to expand. It allows my emotions a place to sit. And I find when I read a really profound poem that is very impactful to me, I really start to go to a separate place that's kind of meditative. In Moonlight by Lorna Crozier, something moves just beyond the mind's clumsy fingers. It has to do with seeds, the earth's insomnia, the garden going on without us, needing no one to watch it, not even the moon. So I think that type of a poem is one where it's kind of a thought, and it's formed and it's very complete in its beginning and ending. And it's not that abstract, it's pretty straightforward. It's a simple, straightforward, clear statement. And I know that for some poetry, it's not like that. And so you may feel like, I don't know what that person is saying, I don't know why those words are there, what are they referring to? And that's something you can always delve deeper into, but it's also something that you don't have to delve deeper into if you don't want to. So I could have just taken the imagery from that poem and enjoyed the imagery, and I did. And I thought about the moon being there, but then not needing to be there because the earth was moving and growing and changing in its own time. And it just was something very beautiful to sit and contemplate for a few minutes. And so I think there is a kind of calming and meditative aspect to poetry. And it can also be something that lifts you up and gets you riled up. So it's got such a wide range of potential in terms of stirring emotions and bringing us to a level of understanding that we may not have had before about a certain topic. I think poetry opens a door. Poetry helps us to resist. Miriam Kaba. Poetry can help lift the ceiling from our brains so that we can imagine liberation. Miriam Kaba. Poetry is for you, it's for everyone. Usually, children's books are often written in a poetic format, and so just think of it as this broad and open sense of words instead of something that's closed and elitist and beyond you, because it certainly isn't. Everybody should read poetry, everybody should find where poetry fits into their lives, and it's also a wonderful way to cleanse your palate in between reading different types of books. Maybe you're getting bogged down in a certain genre and you want to just something to change your perspective in your mind. Poetry can do that. Thanks for watching today. I would love to hear any comments you have about poetry, any poets you would recommend to people, or any thoughts in general about how poetry is a part of your life and what it gives you. And I would just love to hear that information. I think that there is such a wide range out there that people can enjoy, and it's just the beginning of a huge conversation that we should continue having. So thanks so much for watching, and I will be back again soon.